Okay, so there were a lot of little Easter eggs and all that kind of stuff, but nothing too pivotal when it comes to this. There is a fun little Easter egg in relation to Classic X-Men issue number 43 that we're going to talk about, but I do also want to talk about Jake Lockley, because I think I know how Jake Lockley is going to manifest, and I think they told us that Jake Lockley had manifested somewhere along the line. They just didn't tell us directly, right? So here's the thing. Let's start with the reference to Classic X-Men issue number 43. So the cool thing about this is in Marvel Comics, we've got a video explaining this at Comics Explained, right? So that video is far more in-depth. This one's gonna be pretty short and gritty. But the whole idea behind this is that when it comes to like the realm of the afterlife, that's a fairly new thing. That in Marvel Comics way back in the day, all you really had in terms of the afterlife was like the realm of Hela, and that was basically it. Because back in the 1960s and the early 1970s, all you really had were like the Tales of Asgard written and drawn by Jack Kirby, which gave us like the backstory of Asgard, right? How it was created and how Odin rose to power and the early days of Thor and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting if you care about the history of Asgard. It's not if you don't. But in those early days, the only afterlife was the realm of Hela. That when a person died who did not die in like honorable combat, they went to the realm of Hell, which was not really a place where you burned for eternity. It was just the afterlife in general. And that those individuals who died in honorable combat would go to Valhalla if they were allowed in, right? They'd be taken there by the Valkyries and that kind of a thing. But all this changed in the mid-1970s with the introduction of Mistress Death. And the reason why was because at the time, with Thanos being accompanied by Mistress Death, and basically that being his basis for being a nihilist, right? That life is meaningless and always wanting the affection of Mistress Death and so on and so forth, that what this did is it led to Marvel having to offer an explanation of how Mistress Death fits into like the concept of the afterlife. And so depending on what story you're reading, they've said that like Hela is actually an aspect of Mistress Death. And other stories, they're like, no, Hela's her own person, right? She does her own thing. It depends on on how you want to interpret it. But the notion of the afterlife in relation to Mistress Death was brought full force in Classic X-Men issue number 43. That what this did is it was basically a part of the original Dark Phoenix saga, but the Classic X-Men stories were basically reprints of X-Men runs from like Chris Claremont, but new information was added in. And so what they did is they had a moment where Jean Grey had kind of died, but not really, when she was the White Phoenix, and actually traveled to the realm of Mistress Death. And she kind of helped Mistress Death build her own realm out to a little bit, and ended up building this pillar. And when she did, she saw light on the inside of it, and when she looked in, she saw memories, right? She basically saw like her own experiences. And that's when she realized, oh my God, I'm in the realm of Mistress Death. And so what we got in terms of this explanation is like each one of these little pillars that exists out there is basically a person's individual afterlife. That unlike what you saw at the end of Moon Knight, where like Mark Spector quote unquote passes on and ends up in the land of reeds, that it's not some gigantic ethereal place where seemingly everybody hangs out. That the realm of Mistress Death is a place where when you die, you go there and then you experience your own individual afterlife, which is likely populated by the people you've known over the course of your life, or maybe you just relive a sequence of memories for all eternity, hopefully the best ones. And then like that's basically it. Following that, Marvel started introducing people like Mephisto and things along those lines. So like if you're some poor bastard who makes a deal with Mephisto and doesn't realize what it is that you're doing, when you die, you go to his section of hell, because like he has his section, Damon Hellstrom has his section, all those different people out there have their own individual sections of hell. And so that's kind of how the afterlife functions. Now, one of the other cool references that I did love in this episode was the reference to the ancestral plane, because that's kind of like, okay, cool. So like they're referencing Black Panther. That's awesome. Like it's cool to see that. So I imagine that going forward, they'll probably have more references to like the various places of death that you would call it. Of course, this really begs the question, when are we gonna get a reference to Mephisto's section of hell? It would have been cool if they had dropped that, right? Where she had been like, there's a lot of different places that are out there. Just be glad you're not going to like the realm of Mephisto. That place is awful from what I've heard. Like that would have just been like, yes! Right? Like the internet would have exploded if that were the case, if they had like referenced that. I'm so disappointed they're not, but this goes into kind of tying the Classic X-Men and the Moon Knight thing together. So the point that I'm making here is that in this episode, when Steve Grant and Mark Spector were kind of going through and reliving each other's memories, that this was in a lot of ways referencing the Classic X-Men source material, right? From Classic X-Men issue number 43. Is it an exact copy? Not really, but there aren't very many stories and I can't really think of any off the top of my head. I'm not saying they don't exist, I just can't think of any off the top of my head, where this exact form and function is followed outside of classic X-Men issue number 43. So it is cool to see that like they're referencing source material outside of the Moon Knight stuff and then adapting it to Moon Knight itself. But what I do want to talk about here is I want to talk about Jake Lockley, because I think they told us the first time Jake Lockley manifested. So here's the thing, in the point where you have the episode where, or at least the point in the episode, when like they're looking through the window and you see like the body of Mark Spector that's just standing outside that car and is drinking alcohol, I thought that was Jake Lockley initially. I was like, oh my God, it's Jake Lockley. Now, of course it's not. It's basically Mark Spector just avoiding his mother's funeral, and of course he turns into Steve Grant and says like, you know, this was the first time our lives started bleeding over and all that kind of stuff. But I think that they told us exactly when Jake Lockley first appeared. So, like, follow the sequence of events when it comes to Mark Spector's life, right? That Mark Spector had taken his younger brother Roro into a cave when it was raining and they weren't supposed to go in there, and his younger brother drowned. Following that, his mom basically started abusing him and tearing him down because she saw Mark Spector as being the reason for why his younger brother died in the first place. So all her anger and vengeance was taken out on him. And so during that time when she was physically abusing him and emotionally abusing him, that Mark Spector's mind fractured, that he quite literally created the Steve Grant persona. Now, from an official diagnostic standpoint, when it comes to dissociative identity disorder, I'm not really qualified to state whether or not that's how it actually happens. My basic reading has really introduced me to the idea that usually multiple personalities manifest, or splinter personalities manifest, as a result of extreme trauma, right? That the only way the brain can process that trauma is to create a personality that doesn't have to deal with it. And so that's how you supposedly end up with dissociative identity disorder. I don't know if that's true. Again, I'm not qualified to like explicitly state that, but what I do think happened here is while Mark Spector was aware of the abuse that he was experiencing at the hands of his mother, and that while the Steve Grant persona was created to basically create a better life for himself where he never had to experience that, and he grew up believing that like his mom's alive and his mom loved him and his family life was great and all that kind of stuff, I think the Jake Lockley personality was growing and brewing. I don't think it ever appeared. I don't think it ever like manifested in any meaningful way until the death of Mark Spector's mom. Because as far as I'm aware, they didn't tell us how she died. And it wouldn't surprise me one bit if the Jake Lockley persona, given what we've seen so far, that it's not some cab driver who exists out there with his ear to the ground. That's the Marvel Comics version. I think the Jake Lockley persona is much darker. And I think the Jake Lockley persona is far more violent. That I think what happened is that the Jake Lockley persona is the result of all the abuse that Mark Spector basically experienced at the hands of his mom. It's just outright rage, right? The living embodiment of vengeance. Like that's what the Jake Lockley persona is. And that there came a point when Mark was experiencing abuse at the hands of his mom, when perhaps he intentionally or unintentionally thought he was switching over to the Steve Grant persona, and the Jake Lockley persona manifested and killed his mom. And that's how she died, right? That was it. Maybe Jake Lockley made it look like an accident or whatever the case is. And the only time the Jake Lockley persona manifests is when the situation is so extreme that the life of basically all three is in danger, right? The lives of Steve Grant and Mark Spector and Jake Lockley are in danger because somebody's going to kill their physical body, and that Steve Grant and Mark Spector can't handle it. The Jake Lockley persona manifests, takes control, deals with the situation, and leaves. And the reason why I say that is from a mental health perspective. When you're a little kid and you're being abused by your parent, that what it does is it kicks your brain into a fight or flight mode, right? Like you literally feel like your life is in jeopardy. You take that concept and you apply it to the episode where like they were being attacked by the henchmen, and like when Steve Grant came to, that the henchmen were basically in the process of being killed by him, and Mark Spector's like, that wasn't me. Like, I don't know who that was, but like, that wasn't me. That it was Jake Lockley who did that. And that now, when you have the end of this episode, and what you have is Mark Spector out there in the land of reeds, and you've got Steve Grant who's just locked in the sand right out there in Duat. There's nobody else to basically seize control of the body of Mark Spector except for Jake Lockley. And so I think Jake Lockley, that persona, is gonna step in, and that persona, like episode 6 is when we're gonna see him for the first time, and this dude's gonna be crazy. Like it's gonna be wild how just capable this guy is, that he's probably going to be exceedingly dangerous, and yeah, like things are going to pop off. Again, I don't definitively know this. This is just a theory that I have, right? I mean, outside of just sort of linking some things together, which may have no connection whatsoever, I'm just sort of throwing it out there. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments, right? I mean, do you think this is what's going to happen? Do you think that like the Jake Lockley persona was born of like Mark Spector's mom's abuse, and like Jake Lockley killed Mark Spector's mom, and that he only ever comes out every once in a while? Because from what we saw, right, the only real little moment that we saw, which was seemingly Jake Lockley, where he was locked in the casket, dude was beating on that thing for dear life, screaming on and carrying on, all that kind of stuff. Dude seemed hyper violent, right? So like maybe that's the case. Maybe that's what's going on. Because I gotta say, man, if that really is what Jake Lockley is, right, where Mark Spector's just the kid who dealt with all the abuse, and Steve Grant is the one that never had to experience it, and that Jake Lockley is all of Mark Spector's mom's abuse manifested in a physical, in like a mental form, I can't imagine all the rage and like just anguish and pain that guy brings to the table, man. Because then you got to ask the question, what happens when he comes bringing that pain and anguish down on Arthur Harrow? That's the question you got to ask, man. That dude's gonna rue the day. He's gonna rue the day that he messed with Mark Spector. Man, it's gonna be an absolute, man, it's gonna be a bloodbath. But let me know what you guys think, right? Let me know what you think down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.